I'm Emily Carter, 32, and I've always felt responsible for my younger sister Jessica. Growing up in suburban New Jersey, we were inseparable, sharing clothes secrets and summer vacations at the Jersey Shore. When she got engaged to Brad, I was stoked to be her maid of honor. I poured thousands of dollars, countless hours, and all my heart into planning her perfect Nantucket wedding. But family dynamics are always a minefield, especially with my mother Patricia running the show. I never imagined the day she'd look me dead in the eye and say those crushing words. If you're watching this feeling the heat from family drama, drop a comment below. Hit like and subscribe because this story might just give you the strength you need. Being Jessica's older sister meant I was her protector, her go-to person. From teaching her to ride her bike to navigating the treacherous waters of high school cliques, I was the constant she could always count on. Our mother, Patricia, though never hid her favoritism. Jessica was the golden girl with her cheerleading skills and infectious laugh, while I was the responsible one who needed to loosen up. My dad, David, was a quiet presence in our family. He preferred to avoid confrontation whenever Mom's behavior crossed the line. As the responsible eldest, I defaulted to family problem solver. When the garbage disposal broke down, I called a repairman. When the HOA fees were due, I quietly covered the difference from my savings. This continued into adulthood. I helped Jessica financially through her film studies degree at UCLA when Mom and Dad's contributions fell short. My path led me to become a portfolio manager at a reputable firm in downtown Los Angeles. The irony wasn't lost on me, managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for clients while still managing my family's finances. But I didn't mind, honestly. Helping Jessica achieve her dreams gave me genuine satisfaction. When Jessica met Brad Miller at a film festival in Hollywood 3 years ago, I knew they were a match. Brad came from a well-off family in Beverly Hills, but he wasn't pretentious. He truly valued Jessica's creative vision and supported her career aspirations. Their engagement after 2 years of dating wasn't a surprise. I was the first person Jessica called, practically hyperventilating through the phone. "Emily, he proposed. You're going to be my maid of honor, right? I can't do this without you." Her voice bubbled with happiness that November morning after Thanksgiving. "Of course I will." I promised, mentally planning how to make her wedding dreams a reality. The initial planning was everything I'd imagined. Jessica and I spent weekends touring venues, debating color palettes, and creating wedding boards on Pinterest. I took copious notes, determined to make her vision a reality. My apartment became a staging ground for bridal magazines and fabric swatches. The first sign of trouble came during a routine family dinner to discuss the wedding budget. Mom arrived with a leather-bound wedding planner I'd never seen before. "I already put a deposit on the Breaker Palm Beach," she announced before anyone had even touched their salad. "They only had one Saturday free next summer, so I snagged it." Jessica looked surprised but pleased. "Mom, that's so generous." But Emily and I were still comparing venues. "Darling, the Breakers books up a year in advance. We're lucky they had a cancellation." Mom patted Jessica's hand, shooting me a triumphant glance. "Besides, I've always imagined your wedding there." That was the first of many decisions made without consulting me. Within weeks, Mom had transitioned from occasional participant to wedding dictator. Vendors I'd researched were dismissed in favor of a friend of a friend. The color scheme Jessica and I had painstakingly chosen was suddenly too muted. "It's fine," Jessica assured me when I voiced my concerns. "Mom's really enjoying this, and it makes planning easier. Plus, she and Dad are contributing a lot financially." I bit my tongue and stepped back, still helping where I could, but feeling increasingly like an outsider looking in. That feeling intensified when my cousin Sarah started appearing in planning photos on social media. Sarah had always hovered around our family events, eager to be part of the inner circle. Now she was suddenly accompanying Jessica and Mom to vendor meetings I hadn't been invited to. In one Instagram photo, she was holding color swatches against bridesmaid dress options, a task I assumed was mine as maid of honor. "Jessica seems closer to Sarah these days," I mentioned casually to my boyfriend Mike one evening as I scrolled through yet another photo of them at a cake tasting. "Maybe it's just because Sarah has more free time," Mike suggested, always the voice of reason. "You've been slammed at work this quarter." I nodded, pushing down the nagging worry that something more significant was happening. After all, Jessica and I had been each other's anchors for 30 years. A few weeks of wedding planning couldn't change that, right? But as spring progressed, the invitations to planning events stopped coming altogether. When I called Jessica to check in, her responses became vague and rushed. The detailed discussions about centerpieces and music selections were replaced with quick texts, "Mom's handling it," or "already figured it out." Meanwhile, I was still financially contributing to the wedding, putting down a deposit for the photographer Jessica loved, but Mom thought was too expensive, ordering custom welcome bags for out-of-town guests, and secretly arranging what I hoped would be the perfect wedding gift, a luxury honeymoon to Italy complete with first-class flights and a private villa with Tuscan vineyard views. I told myself things would return to normal after the wedding. This was just a stressful time, and soon my sister and I would laugh about Mom's wedding takeover over glasses of wine in her new house in Bel Air. I didn't realize how wrong I was or how quickly the situation would deteriorate beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The day I discovered I wasn't invited to Jessica's wedding dress shopping was like getting punched in the gut. I found out through an innocent question from my coworker Jen, who happened to be friends with the boutique owner. "How was Jessica's appointment yesterday? Lisa mentioned your sister found the one right away." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "What appointment?" Jen's expression shifted from excited to uncomfortable. "Oh, at Bridal Elegance on Rodeo Drive. Lisa said your mom's sister and cousin had champagne and spent hours there. I just assumed you were there, too." I mumbled something about a last-minute work emergency and escaped to the restroom where I stared at my reflection, trying to make sense of being excluded from such a monumental moment. Jessica and I had talked about wedding dress shopping since we were little girls, draping pillowcases over our heads and promising to be there for each other's special moments. I called Jessica that evening, my voice carefully controlled. "How was dress shopping?" A pause. "Oh, it just happened really fast. Mom had an appointment and it wasn't supposed to be the actual shopping day, just a preliminary look with Sarah." Another pause. "She was free, and we needed a third opinion." "I could have made myself free," I said quietly. "You could have asked. Emily, don't make this a big deal. There will be plenty of other wedding stuff you can be a part of." But the other wedding stuff never materialized. The bridal shower was organized without my input, though I was asked to contribute financially to the venue. The bachelorette party planning was taken over by Sarah, who chose a weekend in Vegas, a destination I knew Jessica wouldn't truly enjoy. When I offered suggestions based on 30 years of knowing my sister, they were dismissed as not what Jessica wants anymore. Still, I continued to support from the sidelines. I finalized the honeymoon arrangement, spending $8,600 on first-class flights, luxury accommodations, and activities I knew the couple would love. I imagined Jessica's face when I presented her with the surprise at the rehearsal dinner, pictured the hug and the return of our sisterly bond. Meanwhile, the distance between us grew. Jessica started declining our traditional Sunday brunches at the Ivy, always with a different excuse. When we did speak, our conversations felt scripted and shallow, nothing like the deep talks we'd always shared. "Is everything okay between us?" I finally asked directly after 3 weeks of sporadic communication. "Everything's fine, I'm just super busy with wedding stuff," she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom's been amazing handling all the details." At a family gathering in May, just 2 months before the wedding, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. I'd stepped into the kitchen to refill my water glass when I heard my name from the adjacent dining room. "Emily's always been difficult." My mother's voice carried clearly. "Jessica's finally seeing it now, always has to control everything, make everything about her accomplishments." "It must be hard for Jessica," Sarah responded, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, especially during her wedding when she should be the center of attention. "Exactly. That's why we've had to minimize her involvement, for Jessica's sake." I stood frozen water overflowing my glass as their words sank in. My own mother was actively working to exclude me from my sister's wedding, painting me as some sort of attention-seeking monster to anyone who would listen. That night, I broke down to Mike, finally voicing the fears I'd been suppressing for months. What if they don't even want me at the wedding anymore? What if all this distancing is leading to something worse? Mike pulled me close, his steady presence a contrast to my shaking hands. That's not possible. You're Jessica's sister and you've done nothing but support her. But what if Mom has convinced her otherwise? You don't know how persuasive she can be, how she twists things. Then you need to talk to Jessica directly, Mike said firmly. And at the Smiths' dinner party last month, she mentioned how concerned everyone was about your fragile emotional state and how the family was walking on eggshells around you. I stared at her, stunned. What? Why would she say that? Don't know. But she's been planting these little seeds with everyone in your social circle. Small comments concerned looks, nothing direct enough to seem malicious, just enough to create this impression that you're unstable, somehow difficult. Lily squeezed my hand. I shut it down whenever I heard it, but I'm not everywhere. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. Your controlling behavior, your need to make everything about yourself. She hadn't just been turning Jessica against me. She'd been systematically undermining me with everyone we knew. But why I whispered more to myself than to Lily? What does she gain from this control? Lily said simply. You're successful, independent, financially stable. You have what she never did. Those 5 days were among the longest of my life. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would calmly express my hurt without accusation. I reminded myself that Jessica might be caught in the middle, pressured by our mother's strong personality. I arrived at my parents' house Thursday evening with a heart full of hope for reconciliation and clarity. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush that would shatter my relationship with my family and force me to redefine what loyalty and self-respect truly meant. The evening air felt unusually still as I parked outside my parents' colonial-style home that Thursday. The familiar driveway where Jessica and I had played hopscotch as kids now felt like foreign territory. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, straightened my blouse, and took a deep breath before heading to the front door. Mom answered before I could even ring the bell, her expression unreadable. "We're in the living room," she said curtly, turning without waiting for my response. The scene inside felt staged. Dad sat in his usual armchair, looking uncomfortable and slightly gray. Jessica perched on the edge of the sofa, eyes down, fingers twisting in her lap. Mom positioned herself standing behind Jessica, one hand on the sofa back in what looked like a protective stance. And there, in what had always been my spot during family discussions, sat Sarah looking simultaneously smug and concerned. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing when no one offered me a seat. "Jessica, I thought we were going to talk about the wedding." "That's why we're all here," Mom interjected before Jessica could speak. "There's something you need to understand about the wedding." A strange stillness settled over me, the calm before a storm I could feel approaching. "We've been discussing things," Mom continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she'd perfected over decades as a mother. "And we all agreed that your involvement in the wedding has become problematic." "Problematic," I echoed, looking directly at Jessica, who still wouldn't meet my gaze. "Your controlling behavior, your need to make everything about yourself," Mom said, ticking off points on her fingers like items on a grocery list. "The way you've tried to overshadow Jessica's special time with your opinions and your financial contributions." I felt as though I'd stepped into an alternate reality. "Jessica," I prompted, desperate for my sister to speak for herself. She finally looked up, her expression a mixture of guilt and rehearsed resolve. "It's just been really stressful, Emily. Every time you get involved, there's tension." "Mom thinks," I repeated softly. "What do you think, Jessica?" Before she could answer, Mom stepped forward, placing herself partially between us. "What Jessica thinks is that her wedding should be a happy occasion, and frankly, your presence would make that impossible." The room seemed to tilt slightly as her words registered. "My presence at the planning, you mean?" Mom's lips curved into what could only be described as a smirk, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes at finally delivering the blow she'd been orchestrating for months. "We all agreed. You're not welcome at the wedding. she said, enunciating each word as if she was savoring a fine wine. Not as maid of honor, not as a bridesmaid, not as a guest. It's better for everyone this way. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, marking seconds, in a moment that felt endless. Dad shifted in his chair but said nothing. Sarah had the decency to look at the floor. And Jessica, my sister, my best friend, since her first breath sat in complicit silence, effectively ending 30 years of sisterhood. "I see," I said, finally surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "And when was this decision made? We've been moving this direction for months," Mom replied clearly, pleased by my calm reaction, mistaking shock for acceptance. "Jessica asked Sarah to be her maid of honor weeks ago. We just needed to make it official." I turned to Sarah, who now met my gaze with a challenging look. "Congratulations," I said flatly. "It's nothing personal," she replied, the lie transparent. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Nothing personal about replacing me in my sister's wedding in my sister's life. "Jessica," I tried one more time. "Is this really what you want?" Mom answered again. "Jessica wants a drama-free wedding. You've always been too controlling, too opinionated. Everything has to be your way. The venue wasn't good enough. The caterer wasn't up to your standards." "That's not true, and you know it," I interrupted, feeling the first crack in my composed facade. "I've supported every decision, even when I wasn't consulted. I've contributed thousands of dollars without being asked." "See, there it is," Mom pointed accusingly. "Throwing your money in our faces using your financial contributions to control the wedding. That's exactly why you can't be there." I looked at my father silently, pleading for him to say something, anything. He met my eyes briefly, then looked away, his lifelong pattern of avoiding conflict winning out. Even now, a strange calm settled over me, then a clarity cutting through the hurt and confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a heart-to-heart. This was a carefully orchestrated exclusion months in the making. "Good to know," I said simply. I turned and walked toward the door, my movements mechanical. Behind me, I heard Jessica call my name once softly, but no footsteps followed. No one tried to stop me. The drive home passed in a blur. Streetlights smeared like watercolors as unexpected tears filled my eyes. I pulled over twice when the road became too blurry to navigate safely. My phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming texts, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them. When I finally reached my apartment in West Hollywood, Mike was waiting, his face full of hopeful expectation that crumbled the moment he saw me. "What happened?" he asked immediately, pulling me into a hug. The whole story poured out in disjointed fragments between sobs. The ambush, Mom's cruel smirk, Jessica's betrayal, Dad's silence, Sarah's triumph. "They can't do this," Mike said when I finished, outrage clear in his voice. "You're her sister. You've done nothing but support her." "Apparently, that doesn't matter," I whispered, emotional exhaustion beginning to set in. "Mom's been working on this for months, turning Jessica against me, making me out to be some kind of villain." "What are you going to do?" Mike asked, his hand warm against mine. I stared out the window at the city lights below, feeling hollow, yet somehow lighter, as if the worst had happened, and now I could begin to rebuild. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I know I deserve better than this. All of this." What I didn't realize then was that the confrontation that evening wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the setup for what would come next, both the depths of betrayal and the unexpected path to healing that would follow in the coming days. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake replaying the scene at my parents' house, analyzing every word, every look, searching for something I might have misunderstood or misinterpreted. But the memory of my mother's satisfied smirk as she delivered her verdict left no room for ambiguity. By 4:00 a.m., I'd given up on sleep entirely. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside me, I began to catalog all I had contributed to Jessica's wedding. The photographer deposit, $2,500. Custom welcome bags for out-of-town guests, $800. The string quartet I'd arranged as a surprise for the ceremony, $1,200. The list grew longer as I remembered smaller expenses. The vintage hairpin I'd found that matched Jessica's grandmother's earrings. The calligrapher I'd hired for the place cards after Jessica mentioned loving hand lettering. And then the honeymoon, the crown jewel of my gifts to my sister and Brad. First-class flights to Italy, $4,200. The private villa with Tuscan vineyard views, $3,800. The special experiences I'd arranged, private cooking class, Vespa, tour, wine tasting, $600. I'd contributed over $15,000 to a wedding I was now banned from attending. The first light of dawn was breaking when I made my decision. I opened my laptop and navigated to my banking app. With steady fingers, I transferred the $600 honeymoon fund back to my personal account. Next, I logged into the airline and resort websites, methodically canceling each reservation. I sent a brief professional email to the travel agent handling the special experiences, explaining that the plans had changed. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the night with incoming texts and calls, but I hadn't looked at it. Now I checked the notifications. 3 missed calls from Jessica, 12 from Mom, even 1 from Dad, which was unusual. There were multiple texts, most from Mom, ranging from defensive, "You're making this all about you again," to accusatory, "After everything we've done for you." Nothing that indicated remorse or reconsideration. I made one last call to my credit card company. "I need to report some unauthorized charges," I explained to the representative. "Family members have been making purchases without my permission." It wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't entirely untrue either. I'd never explicitly authorized my mother to use my card information for the additional wedding favors she'd ordered last month, or the upgraded linens she'd insisted upon. By 7:00 a.m., I'd methodically untangled my financial ties to Jessica's wedding. I sent a brief email to my boss explaining I needed a personal day, then turned off my phone completely. The sudden silence felt both terrifying and liberating. I spent the morning walking through Griffith Park trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. The betrayal felt physical, an actual ache beneath my ribs that intensified with each breath. Jessica and I had shared everything for 30 years. Secrets, dreams, sorrows, celebrations. How could she sit silently while Mom banished me from her wedding? How could she replace me with Sarah of all people? Around noon, I met my best friend Lily for lunch at a cafe in Los Feliz. I hadn't planned to tell her everything, but one look at my face, and she knew something was catastrophically wrong. "They did what?" she exclaimed when I finished explaining loud enough that neighboring tables turned to look. "Your own mother said that to your face." I nodded, pushing salad around my plate without eating, and Jessica just sat there, said nothing. Lily's outrage was validated after hours of self-doubt. "That was your doing, wasn't it?" I turned braced for criticism disguised as a compliment, but her expression held something I rarely saw directed at me. Genuine appreciation. "Yes," I answered simply. "Jessica mentioned loving hand lettering, so—" Mom nodded, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. Finally, she spoke again, her voice lower, less certain. "You've always noticed those details about people. What they love, what matters to them. I never had that gift." The admission, so small yet so significant coming from her, left me momentarily speechless. "The therapist Carol recommended," Mom continued, looking anywhere but at me, "says I need to practice acknowledging others' strengths without feeling diminished by them. Apparently, I have work to do in that area." A brief, humorless laugh. "You're seeing a therapist?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. "Your father insisted after everything." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "I don't expect this to fix things between us. I know that will take time if it's even possible, but I'm trying." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a transformation, but it was a tiny crack in the fortress of denial she'd built around herself. And for today, that was enough. 1 month after the wedding, our family began tentative group therapy sessions with Dr. Ramirez. Mom attended reluctantly at first, then with increasing willingness as the framework gave her acceptable ways to express her needs without manipulation. Dad found his voice gradually speaking truths long suppressed. Jessica and I strengthened our sisterhood, now built on mutual respect rather than codependent patterns. My own healing journey continued independently as well. I established clearer boundaries in all relationships, not just with family. I learned to recognize when my helping veered into unhealthy territory. And most importantly, I began to value myself apart from what I could provide or do for others. Small comments concerned looks. Nothing direct enough to seem malicious, just enough to create this impression that you're unstable, somehow difficult. Lily squeezed my hand. I shut it down whenever I heard it, but I'm not everywhere. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. Your controlling behavior, your need to make everything about yourself. She hadn't just been turning Jessica against me. She'd been systematically undermining me with everyone we knew. And I learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting that boundaries aren't barriers to love, but foundations for its healthiest expression, and that standing firm in your own worth is not selfish, but essential. The journey from that devastating night when my mother said those cruel words, "We all agreed you're not welcome at the wedding," to where I stand now wasn't direct or easy. It required courage to face painful truths, wisdom to distinguish healthy relationships from toxic ones, and strength to demand the respect I deserved. If you're facing similar family challenges or painful exclusions, remember that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that ultimately lead to healing. Your worth isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it, and sometimes when the door to reconciliation seems firmly closed, it's the first step toward opening a healthier one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to stand up to family manipulation or set difficult boundaries with loved ones? How did you find the courage to value yourself when others couldn't see your worth? Drop a comment below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Your support means everything as we navigate these complicated human experiences together. Thank you for listening, and remember your story matters too.